Hello and welcome to this talk today on the 5 overlooked secrets for improving the menopause experience. I'm delighted to go through this with you. I'm Claire Snowdon-Darling, and that's me on the left-hand side of your screen. And the lady on the right-hand side is my wonderful business partner, the fabulous Laura Knowles. So, who am I? Well, I'm the clinical director of our online clinic, Hormone Wellness. I have a lot of clinical experience. I've been in private practice since 2007. Between us, we are also the heads of the College of Functional Wellness, which we started. It's an international training academy where we provide accredited practitioner training in hormones and menopause. We developed a very unique clinical approach, which was developed from not only research and clinical experience, but also our own journeys of ill health and having hormone imbalances. So we have been, in fact, we are, at the coal face, the sticky, pointy end of hormone imbalances. So we have absolutely trodden the path. Our work is really unique because it focuses on, I'm going to go through these with you, the 6 pillars that we need to be looking at to get good hormonal health. That's blood sugars, stress hormones, the pesky sex hormones that are always a problem when we go into menopause, digestion, immune, and also emotional transformation. So we've been talking about this for quite a long time, Laura and I, and as such, we are also the authors of a book called Improving the Menopause Experience Through Nutrition and Lifestyle. It's a catchy title, and we are published by Jessica Kingsley Publishing. We're featured as experts on a fabulous website called menopause.co.uk, and we're also regularly featured in the national press, chatting about all things hormones and menopause. So it seems like menopause is getting worse. There's a lot of arguments that that's not true, and it is just purely because we have a situation where we've got lots of celebrities talking about menopause, which is great. But having actually been at the coalface of this and working with thousands and thousands of people going through menopause, I feel like it is really different now, compared to when my mum went through it, my aunties went through it. I feel like we are seeing a genuine decline in hormonal health, not just women's, but actually everyone's hormonal health. There's lots in the news all the time about things like testosterone being in decline. We are definitely seeing a change in hormonal health. And there are a lot of red flags that show that there is potentially an issue with hormonal health that often feature throughout our whole life. And they can often get overlooked and normalized. And so then what happens is we're trying to go through what should be a natural transition, and our bodies are just, they've been dealing with this stuff throughout our whole life and they haven't got it. That's really what it is. And a lot of the things that are common and that we see right from puberty are things like fatigue, exhaustion, depression, headaches and migraines, things like irritable bowel syndrome, digestive issues, weight gain, or not even not being able to put weight on. That can also be another issue. Allergies and intolerances, and reactions to HRT or HRT not working. And so these are the things that we're sort of seeing come in over and over and over into clinic that people talk about in relation to their menopause, but they were also sort of appearing in their life before the perimenopause transition started. So why is this? Well, I like to use this phrase bandwidth, and I always think about Wi-Fi. If you're in a house where loads of people are using devices, it's very, very easy for us to run out of bandwidth. And it's exactly the same with our bodies. Our bodies are dealing with so much these days that by the time we come into this period of our life where there's a lot required of our body to go through this transition. I mean, we can think back to what it was like at puberty. It was pretty tough. If you've been pregnant, what your body had to go through at this time of hormonal change. It's the same with menopause. It requires a lot from our body. And if we have been dealing with a lot of additional stress throughout our life, through our fertile years, through our 20s, 30s, into our 40s, when we come into this time that's going to require a lot from us, it's like we've used up all our stress credit and our body just hasn't got it, and it just can't cope with this transition. One of the other things that we see really commonly is a lot of people, as they're coming into menopause, we also see that they have got diagnoses or have been dealing with other big chronic health issues. So, not just the red flags like IBS and migraines, we're talking about really big issues. So, things that could be life affecting, autoimmune conditions, cancer. So many people now, cancer survivors, now going through menopause, really struggling, but also these chronic health, other chronic health issues like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, ME. I call them, I lump them together as the fatigue disorders. They present quite a similar fashion. And what we like to talk about, and it's what we're going to be going into in quite big depth in this talk, is why we are dealing with all of these things and what that's got to do with our menopause. Because actually, again, for us, there is such a connection between this chronic health picture and then struggling at menopause. And so what I like to refer to this as on this slide is that it's like we've thrown all these ingredients together, and then we've baked this all these ingredients, and we've come out with a cake. It's just the cake is chronic health. So there is the fatigue, there is the fatigue disorder, there is the autoimmune disease, there is the, having to have gone through a cancer journey. And so then we have to look at, well, what are the ingredients? And so the ingredients that we tend to be putting, because these things don't come out of nowhere. Nothing comes out of nowhere. So these things don't come out of nowhere. And so what's going on in the lead up to getting this chronic health diagnosis? Poor diet, high stress, imbalanced hormones, impaired digestion. This is all such a common story. Toxic overload and medications such as the pill or other things. What happens then is this is kind of going on in the background, and then there's what we call a trigger event. So this could be a big hormonal change like perimenopause. So it's very common for women to be diagnosed with an autoimmune disease during perimenopause, or of course we see very commonly, it's very common to be diagnosed with cancer during peri to postmenopause transition. The trigger event will be something like the big hormonal change. It could also be something like a viral or bacterial infection. So it's very common that we hear about a fatigue disorder diagnosis on the back of, and something like long COVID, on the back of a flu or a big illness. Surgery, injury, trauma, and immunizations are also potential trigger events, as well as breast implants or other cosmetic surgery where we're putting things into the body. And so the trigger events are basically like the oven on high heat that we're putting our ingredients into, and then what comes out is this cake, which is the condition. And so a lot of people are dealing with all of this as well as going through menopause. So they're in quite an unstable situation as they then go through this transition. And I love the analogy of this iceberg, because what we tend to all be dealing with throughout our lives and also through peri to postmenopause transition is the stuff that we can see above the water in this picture. So the tip of the iceberg: autoimmune conditions, headaches and migraines, thyroid issues, infections, PCOS, this constant kind of sugar craving, exhaustion, skin issues, poor sleep, anxiety, IBS, high cholesterol, weight gain. But so it's so easy to see all these things as separate, but actually, when we look underneath the water, we are seeing what is actually causing it. So the ingredients, as it were. So low protein, gut permeability, food intolerances, insulin resistance, having a sluggish liver, histamine intolerances, The constant eating of ultra processed foods, estrogen dominance, cortisol resistance, chronic inflammation, leptin resistance, and progesterone deficiency. This is really what's going on. So I've talked a bit about the stressors and stress, and it's so easy for us to think that stress is just to do with, work or family or those kind of things. But one of the things that I really like to bring people's attention to is what I call the stressors. And this is the foundation of an approach that I love to use in my work with hormones, which is what I call the whole health approach. And so when we start to look at these stresses, they're broken down into the sort of the realms that they come from. And so the biochemical stresses would be that we're consuming foods we're intolerant to, that we're eating a poor diet, we're grabbing and going. There's chemical toxicity that we're exposed to. So that could be things in our skincare, our cleaning products, pesticides and pollution. We have depleted nutrition. Definitely in the UK, our food chains are depleted. So even if we're eating loads of veg, our veg is actually depleted of minerals such as magnesium. Um, Dehydration, a lot of people don't drink enough water. And even when we do, if it's tap water, our water quality is quite poor these days. Um, Biochemically stressed if we're using medications, contraception, or hormone replacement. And obviously, I just want to say that medications, are really important if they've been prescribed to you. They can also just, that there is like, a risk as well as a reward with medications. Alcohol and addictions would be a biochemical stressor, definitely in the UK, reduced sunlight and vitamin D, and also radiation. There is a lot of radiation that we are dealing with now, way more than there was 50 years ago. Moving on to the electrical stressors on our body. So dehydration again, EMF radiation and devices exposure, because let's be honest, these are never very far away from us. And light toxicity, huge amounts of research now going into light toxicity and its effect on the body. Then emotional stresses. Well, this is a non-exhaustive list, isn't it? And this is really just for illustrative purposes because, I mean, emotional stresses can just be about, it come from anywhere and be anything. But as a general overview, anxiety, depression, overwhelm, relationship pressure, social pressure and inequality, social media pressure, low self-esteem, lots of those low body confidence issues, financial and work pressure and societal pressures, including the pandemic, which have changed a lot of people's life. That period has changed a lot of people's lives, and there's still quite a lot of people trying to get over some of the changes that have happened, and addictions also. And then we have structural stressors on our body. So this would be poor posture, lack of exercise and movement, so having a sedentary lifestyle, or it could be over-exercising or exercising, doing the wrong kind of exercise or at the wrong time of day. Tight shoes or clothing, too much driving, being in one position for long periods of time, and also that holding these devices and the neck posture. So the lens that I use to look at what's going on in the body and where we're going to be starting to look in terms of how do we improve our menopause. The unique clinic model that Laura and I created is called the Triangle of Hormonal Health. And for ease, I want you to imagine a three-legged stool. And for this stool to be weight-bearing and to support us, we need all of the legs to be stable and to be, the same length for it to be sturdy. And what we're going to be thinking about with our stool is that if one of our legs is wonky, we're going to have problems when we sit on that stool. It's just not going to weight bear properly. If a couple of the legs are wonky, all three of the legs are wonky, it's kind of game over. That stool is not functioning. And so the way that we're talking about this is we're talking about three sets of hormones that work together. And the fact that they work together isn't talked about very often. You'll hear about a couple of them as isolated cases, but not about all of them. And this is where the magic happens in understanding how we can improve our menopause. So, the first set of hormones are our blood sugar hormones. Second set of hormones are our stress hormones. And the third set of hormones are those sex hormones. And what happens is if I've got a wonky stool, then it's very rare that people say, oh, I've definitely got an imbalance with my stress hormones. They might know they're stressed, but they don't know they've got an imbalance with their stress hormones. Actually, what happens first, before we start getting symptoms manifesting in all these, with all these hormone areas, is something in our body will go off. And usually, not always, but usually, the first signs will be our digestive system. That's that pesky IBS or the bloating, all those kind of things, or the immune system. So that could be things like eczema. It could just be constantly getting colds. These are the places that start to develop issues when I've got a wonky stool. So let's start diving in a little bit more deeply into those hormones. And so why are these so important? So the first set of hormones we're going to talk about are our blood sugar hormones. And when we're talking about blood sugar hormones, I'm predominantly talking about four hormones. There are quite a few blood sugar hormones, but these are the ones I really want to bring your attention to because they are so important, particularly in the peri to postmenopause transition. So firstly, insulin. A lot of people know about insulin. It lowers our blood sugar. So this, when I'm going to tell, when I'm talking to you about the hormones, all of these kind of positive aspects are when the hormones are imbalanced. When they're not in balance, this is when problems, start to show. So insulin lowers blood sugar, but when we've signaled to the body that we need to produce insulin, our body actually goes into fat storage. So if you're struggling with weight gain, you don't really want to be in fat storage. The second hormone is leptin. Leptin's a really, really great hormone. It reduces appetite when it's balanced, and it's responsible for fat burning. It also reduces anxiety. Now, I like to focus on anxiety because, people talk about having anxiety all the time, and it's one of the main symptoms that starts to creep up during menopause. And it is actually one of the main reasons that people are medicated. So this is why it's so important to understand why diet and lifestyle have such a huge impact on our menopause experience. So our next hormone is ghrelin. I like to call it gremlin because it's the hormone that makes our tummy rumble when we're hungry. It's that grrr sound. And when ghrelin is balanced, it also reduces anxiety. It kind of makes sense that if my ghrelin's built up, and so my tummy's rumbling, my tummy's rumbling, my tummy's rumbling, we get to a point, don't we, where we're quite fidgety. We're like, oh, I'm quite unsettled. I can't rest. I can't stop because I know I've got to go and get food. This is the ghrelin working. So you can start to see that if my ghrelin is actually out of balance on a regular basis, I'm going to start to display quite a lot of anxiety symptoms. Another sign of ghrelin being out of balance is never being hungry. So this can also be a sign of imbalanced blood sugars. The fourth hormone I want to talk to you about is cholecystokinin, or CCK for short. And this is to do with satisfaction around food. It's also the hormone that creates gut motility, so that supports the food to be pushed through our small intestine, which, bearing in mind, sort of 3 out of 5 people who have irritable bowel syndrome tend to be women. And all the deep diving into irritable bowel that we have done, and that means, we have spoken to gastroenterologists and specialists, they always say that hormones are implicated. This is one of the hormones that's implicated. Cholecystokinin is also really important in memory and anxiety. And so let's talk about what we mean by keeping your blood sugars in balance. So this is a little graph that shows what our blood sugars should be doing, but what most people's are doing. So this green line is how our blood sugars are meant to be. They're supposed to sort of go up and down like this nice little gentle wave. But for most people, what is happening is we're getting these big peaks and troughs. Now, these peaks and troughs will happen for a variety of reasons. They'll happen because we are not eating enough. We're eating foods we're intolerant to. we're eating high carbs. Yeah, like high carbs and sugar. Or number four, we are very stressed. So you could have a perfect diet, and if you're highly stressed, you could still end up blood sugar imbalanced. In fact, people have been known to develop type 2 diabetes from stress alone. So it's very important that we get our blood sugars balanced, because what happens when we are eating foods that are high sugar or that we're intolerant to, we will get this spike of a hormone called cortisol, which is a stress hormone. We're going to talk about it more in a moment. And as it spikes our blood sugars, then the blood sugars go, oh, I need to bring that blood sugar down. I'm going to produce insulin. Insulin plummets us back down to where we were, which then sends out a hunger signal and a bit of panic. So I'm going to put cortisol into the system. Cortisol spikes the blood sugars, and around and around and around we go. So let's move on to stress hormones. So it's very important to understand our endocrine system. So our endocrine system is our glandular system. And the glandular system is made up of all of our glands. So our pineal gland, which is the light and dark receptor in the brain. Our hypothalamus is actually the central nervous system. So this is all the signals that we get from the outside world. So touch, sight, smell, all those kind of things. The pituitary gland does an awful lot of stuff, but it also conducts the whole orchestra. The thyroid gland, very important in metabolism and heat and cold regulation. The thymus, important in the development of our immune system. Our pancreas, which from an endocrine perspective is to do with the insulin production, but actually its biggest job is supposed to be in digestion, and a lot of times it's not able to do that job because it's so busy with the endocrine system. And our adrenal glands, which produce our stress hormone, and then our testes and our ovaries, which make our sex hormones. And when everything is working together, we are beautifully balanced and everything is fine. But when things are out of balance, we actually don't feel great at all. And because of the big shifts that are happening during peri to post menopause, it's very common to feel tired and exhausted, wired and racy, get sugar cravings, inflammation, digestive problems, colds and bugs, sleeping difficulty, headaches, weight gain, weight loss, hot and cold issues, low sex drive, and irregular periods. Obviously, irregular periods is part of menopause. And so when we understand how the endocrine system works, the mystery starts to go out of these common symptoms, and we can start to actually move forward knowing what to do. So the big thing I want to focus on is this diagram, which is called the HPA axis, which stands for the hypothalamus. Remember, that's your central nervous system, the pituitary, and the adrenal. And axis means conversation. So this conversation between the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal glands. And the conversation goes like this. The hypothalamus sees, smells, touches danger, or the anterior pituitary gets a message of something critical happening in the body. And so that kind of signal could be desperate for a wee. I'm desperately hungry. Like I have to, there is this problem internally that needs to be sorted. And so the hypothalamus or the anterior pituitary will send a message to the adrenals that say, could you please make some stress hormone for me? Make that stress hormone cortisol. And the adrenals will go, yep, okay, I'm going to make the cortisol. And then when they make the cortisol, a little memo goes back to the pituitary and the hypothalamus that says, I've done the job. Stop sending the message. I've done it. And the message is supposed to be switched off. However, in today's world, we are constantly dealing with stress. So the alarm went off 20 minutes ago. Now the kids are screaming at each other. You know, I'm going to have a coffee. I've just kind of, been late to get them to school. Then I'm going to get to work. And then there's that email that just really triggered me. And so what happens is, because this message in green is constantly coming, this memo that the adrenals send back gets switched off. And so this feedback gets stopped. And so that's what we call an HPA axis dysregulation. And this is how most people are presenting. So the only message that is coming from our brains is we are under stress, make cortisol. And one of the reasons this is so challenging for our bodies is because we have these two sides to our nervous system. We have the sympathetic dominant side, which is, sympathetic nervous system side, which is our get up and go. It's our, I'm getting ready to run. Everything is geared up for me to go, 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 go. Then we have the parasympathetic side, which is our calm down, rest and digest. It's also the get jiggy with it side. And so if we're in constant sympathetic nervous system, well, that's not how we're supposed to operate. We're supposed to be able to switch between the two. But so many people are stuck in that HPA axis dysregulation that they're also stuck in sympathetic dominant. And so what happens is our bodies never get the message to calm down, relax, rest, digest. So let's move on to talk about sex hormones and why is all this important for sex hormones? Okay, so before we get into the menopause bit, let's just talk about the female cycle and what a healthy cycle looks like. So we have three hormones. We have estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And so on this diagram, the estrogen is red, the testosterone is yellow, and the progesterone is yellow, and the testosterone is blue. As you can see, estrogen peaks around week 2. That's when we ovulate, and then it sort of drops off, and then just a little bump just before we bleed. And then progesterone sort of flatlines, and then it grows and grows and grows. It peaks just before we bleed, and testosterone also peaks around the time we ovulate, so that we're like, yes, I am raring to go. Let's make a baby. So when we talk about these hormones, estrogen is a stimulating hormone. It's very, very energizing. It helps with ovulation, metabolism, energy, libido, mood. It protects our heart and it regulates insulin. That's a good thing, right? Again, when it's in balance. When it's not in balance, it doesn't do these things. Progesterone calms us down. This is so important. Put a pin in this note. Progesterone calms us down. It's the only hormone that we have in our female cycle that calms us down. It holds a pregnancy. It's a fertility hormone. It's a cycle regulator. It's for mood. It stops us getting bloated. It helps us with sleep. It gives us lovely hair, lovely skin, nice regular periods, and comfortable periods. It's good for bone density, muscle mass, and reduces inflammation. So if you're a person with autoimmune conditions, reducing inflammation sounds important. As we're menopausal and can't sleep, sleeping sounds important. Testosterone is great for libido. It's great for energy, hair, bone health, breast health, fertility, menstrual and vaginal health. So what's happening in peri to post menopause? Well, when we look at this diagram, we've got estrogen in blue, estrogen in the greeny turquoise, and the navy blue is the progesterone. I'm not going to talk about testosterone so much here. But in our puberty years, our progesterone and estrogen rise, and then they track along quite happily. You'll see that there's always a little more estrogen to progesterone, but I want you to think about ratio, that the ratio is right. Or at least it should be right, because I think a lot of us have been struggling for a few years. And so then what happens when we come into perimenopause is estrogen, you can see, stays the same, cracks on as it was, always has been, but progesterone falls off a cliff. Now, by definition, perimenopause starts around 36. And so this is when, if you think back to maybe your journey, depending on where you are now, a lot of women can really start to lose their confidence, notice some weight gain, notice their sleep goes off, just start to notice things where they think they're going a bit crazy and they're not. And it's all kind of passed off, and often we put on antidepressants or our digestion goes off. This is what I mean by these red flags that are ignored, because often this is the onset of perimenopause, but because the current doctors' guidelines, the NICE guidelines, don't recommend, they would just pass, if you're under 40, they just pass you off as too young for perimenopause. And if we're over 45, they won't do the tests. So, and even if they do the test, they often don't test progesterone. So we're kind of stuck not getting the right information. So progesterone's fallen off a cliff, and we have this situation where I've got too much estrogen to progesterone as a ratio. So this is often called estrogen dominance. I prefer to call it progesterone deficiency because it makes more sense. So then what happens as we start to go through the menopause transition is estrogen starts to go crazy and then it too drops off. However, that going crazy estrogen might not be until in our 50s. So we could be going through a lot of symptoms for a really long time. So it's really important to then know that if you have gone to the doctor, the current NIC regulations state that if a woman's to be given HRT, which you will over the age of 45, you'll definitely be given HRT without a test, sometimes if you're over 40. But the HRT that they will be giving you will be for a postmenopausal woman. That is how the NICE guidelines talks about all menopause. That means they're giving you estrogen and progesterone. But look at what's happening in perimenopause. Your estrogen tends to be fine. So often, this is one of the things that I see so commonly in clinic, is that women have been given both estrogen and progesterone, and they're just feeling worse and worse and worse. And so, it's so important that we actually get some really decent tests so that we can see what's happening with estrogen. So, this is one of my campaigns, is how we change how we work with perimenopausal women, but we're a long way off yet. And so I want to come back to, like we talked about the adrenal glands, and this is such an important piece of information. This was such an aha moment for me, because we're always taught in biology at school or science at school that it's our ovaries that make our progesterone and our estrogen, and that is true, and our testosterone. But our adrenal glands, remember we talked about those already, our stress hormone glands also make some of our sex hormones. Now, I've never been able to get the definitive amount, but Wikipedia tells me it's 35% of our hormones are made by our adrenal glands. So they're making 30%, 35% of our hormones the whole way through our life. And then when our ovaries switch off making our hormones in peri to postmenopause, our adrenal glands are our primary source. Now, this is why this is important, because if you look at this middle channel, our adrenal, we're going to talk about how our adrenal glands make those hormones. So our adrenal glands they basically take cholesterol, which is also known as fat, in our diet. And let's just go back to the 1980s low fat fad that we've been dealing with for the last 30 years. If fat's not in our diet, our bodies can't make hormones. This is one of the reasons that we're all in a pickle. But our bodies take fat and they use the cholesterol from fat to make a hormone called pregnenolone. Now, pregnenolone is like a precursor hormone. They call it the mother hormone. And pregnenolone goes on to either, on this right-hand side, make a great hormone called DHEA, which goes on to become testosterone and estrogen, or it will make progesterone. But if we are under stress or are exposed to stressors that we spent time earlier talking about, from an evolutionary perspective, our body won't make progesterone. It will choose to make the stress hormone cortisol instead, because it is not important to hold a baby in the womb and to be relaxed. It is more important to get out of danger. And so a lot of women we are seeing going through this, it's called the pregnenolone steal. I didn't make the name. It confuses me. But this going through this process where we're making cortisol instead of progesterone, I believe actually from quite early in life, if you've had some of those red flag symptoms. And so this is very important. This is why I believe that our menopause is getting worse, because our adrenal glands have other things that are running out of bandwidth and can't deliver properly because they're too busy making cortisol. So I just want to bring your attention to aldosterone at the top of that chart also, because aldosterone is a hormone made by the adrenal glands, and it's responsible for blood pressure and fluid retention. And again, two of the things that are highly medicated in menopause are fluid retention and blood pressure. And so very often women say, well, I've had all these heart checks and my heart's fine. And I'm like, did they test your aldosterone? And if not, then we need to be talking about stress, and we need to be looking at how we reduce as many of these stressors as possible. So let's move on to the digestive system. Okay, so this is a unique model that Laura and I have created. Our history has been with IBS like our whole lives, and we have spent decades trying to get to the bottom of it. And because of our hormone issue, it made us start to put these connections together. And so when we have IBS, it's very hard to eat regularly and properly because it hurts. And so that leads to blood sugar instability. And when we have blood sugars that are unstable, our insulin goes high. And when we've got high insulin, there's a hormone in our gut called motilin, which is to do with this motility, like remember CCK, that also then goes down. So we can't move the food through our bowel. If our blood sugars are unstable, you already know our cortisol is going to spike. There's an interesting connection when our cortisol spikes that actually some of the muscles in our leg can get quite tight. And as such, we can get a rotated pelvis, very, very common. And when we get a rotated pelvis, there's some structures in our bowel. One of them is called the ileocecal valve, or ICV. And this either gets sort of pulled open or stuck shut. And this can cause a lot of irritable bowel syndrome, either constipation or diarrhea. Also, if there's too much cortisol, the peristalsis. So we've got the motility that pushes the food through, and we've got the peristalsis that kind of, again, moves everything through the bowel. Peristalsis just starts to slow down. So this is the griping, the twisting, all of those kind of feelings with irritable bowel syndrome. And then as our cortisol rises, as we already know, this is going to drop our progesterone, and we're going to end up with high estrogen in relation. And when we've got this situation, when we've got too much cortisol, not enough progesterone, it boosts a neurotransmitter called serotonin, which actually can increase pain. If we've got high estrogen, this actually elevates our histamine, which is part of our immune response, and inflammation in the gut. And this can lead to food intolerances. And when we're in this whole messy place, we've got this buildup of estrogen and cortisol and serotonin in the bowel, and our poor liver becomes overwhelmed. And this is like this whole picture of irritable bowel syndrome. And this goes on to affect the environment in our gut. And so this would be affecting our gut microbiome. So there are 40,000 parasites, 5 million fungi, and 300,000 bacteria in the body. And they are very sensitive to refined carbohydrates, pesticides, medication, and food intolerances. When these bacteria are disrupted, they produce something called endotoxins. And it's like a gas. And these endotoxins go on to cause quite a lot of inflammation, and things like you might have heard of leaky gut. It's called intestinal permeability. This really is what we're often talking about with an inflammatory picture. The gut microbiome is also responsible for detoxing our estrogen. So there's part of the microbiome that's job is to detox excess estrogen. That's called our estrobolome. And when this is all disrupted, it can't do its job effectively. And it's very interesting when we have a buildup of estrogen in the gut. So beta-glucuronidase is an enzyme created by gut bacteria, and it reabsorbs toxins, drugs, and hormones such as estrogen, and will reabsorb them back into the bloodstream. And so that's not great, because if we're in this high gut bacteria place with high beta-glucuronidase, we end up with higher toxin levels and higher estrogen levels. So again, it's really common that I see in clinic that women have been using estrogen HRT, but they're still showing signs of poor estrogen. They're not absorbing it properly, and they're recirculating sort of crappy old estrogen. And so we're in this place of sort of having high estrogen and estrogen dominance, but also low estrogen. And so it can be quite messy. And so one of the big issues that I have is that all of the high dose estrogen therapy that's been promoted, no one's talking about the gut, and we have got to get the gut right before we start plying it with hormones. And so when we have these endotoxins in the gut, we have this real problem. So we get this gut dysbiosis, this gut issue, and that causes this leaky gut, so gut permeability. This creates more of these endotoxins, which are technically called lipopolysaccharides, and those go through the gut barrier, which travels to the ovary and it impacts the corpus luteum, which lowers the production of progesterone and increases cortisol again, which increases our menopause symptoms. And when we end up with this low progesterone and high estrogen issue, we end up with constipation. And our wonderful vagus nerve, which runs all the way through our body, is so responsible for dealing with stress and like sensing trauma. The vagus nerve can kind of go into quite a lot of sort of panic. And so, again, we end up with quite a lot of anxiety and just general malaise and not great. We can also end up with small intestine bacterial overgrowth or small intestine fungal overgrowth. And so, there's just a lot of gut issues. I'm not absorbing anything. I'm piling on weight, my sleep's disrupted, I'm exhausted. All of these issues can be very much linked to the gut. And then the immune system. So histamine and the menopause really, really connected. So some of the main symptoms of menopause are an increase in things like allergies, hives, itching, and digestive issues, which can be a buildup of histamine. And histamine is an immune response. So the body produces enzymes like this one called DAO, diamine oxidase, to keep histamine in check. But if we've got this disrupted gut, it will actually stop us from producing it. So if we've got high estrogen, we also get a decrease in DAO production, which is not great. And estrogen stimulates mast cells to make more histamine, and more histamine leads to more estrogen production. So it's a vicious cycle. So a lot of women I speak to feel that they have a histamine issue, and rather than just going on a low histamine diet, we have to start looking at some foundational pieces first, and we've got to get that gut sorted out. All of that sounds really awful, doesn't it? I mean, it's not fun, but menopause can be a real gift. Like, just, yeah, frustrating gift, maybe not a gift we think we want, but it makes us look at everything. And so I like to bring what I call the whole health approach. Like, this is just a checklist of, am I doing everything to sort out my symptoms? So one of the first things that I like to look at is food intolerance elimination. We might have got away with eating foods that we're intolerant to when we were younger and we had balanced hormones. But as we're getting older and our menopause is upon us, it's like, I just want to sort of describe it as menopause shines a light on all the things in our life that aren't serving us. And so it's like it's just going to show you, it's going to show you with a very, very, very bright spotlight what isn't okay. So it might be that you used to get away with drinking 2 glasses of wine a night, but now you can't sleep if you do that. It's just going to show you everything. So if you're not eating a diet that's macronutrient balanced and stabilizing your blood sugars, if you're not working on stress management and reduction, then you're not then working on the sex hormone balance, making sure you're eating nutrient dense food. Are you maximizing your digestion? Organic food, is that relevant? Sometimes to some people, not to everyone. Vagus nerve support, I've talked about it a little bit, but that can be really important as our hormones change, especially as we can't get into the rest and digest because that's what progesterone helps with, and that drops off so much. Any structural imbalances, I mean, my goodness, we have to battle those aches and pains anyway, don't we? Immune support, education on health options as well. A lot of women don't know what the options are, which is why I'm so passionate about doing talks like this. Getting the right exercise, getting in nature, sleep management. I mean, it all sounds like, oh gosh, it's just such a big checklist. And it can be really, really hard, not going to lie, but that's also part of the process is how do I deal with the fact that I'm not, like an iron woman anymore, that I actually need all these things. Supplements, emotional resilience, boundaries, avoiding xenoestrogens. So those are toxic chemicals that create estrogen mimicking compounds, and self-love practices. Menopause is a time to learn to say no. So, what are we going to do about it? Well, we need to reduce our stressors. Looking at food intolerances is so key. I'm going to go on and on and on about it because we can expect our HRT to just work a treat, but it's not going to if we haven't got the foundations of our health right and in place. Got to work on those sedentary lifestyles. We need to move our bodies now. Lifestyle pressure and emotional issues, it's too easy for us to believe that we have got to do this thing or I can't get out of this thing. But actually, when we really start drilling into it, it's amazing what can happen if we really choose to say no. Toxic chemicals. We need to start looking at what we're exposed to because a lot of these chemicals are called endocrine disruptors. And what we're trying to do with this whole health approach is not disrupt our endocrine. So it's really important. So with the food intolerances, the foods to avoid are wheat, processed foods, processed sugars, and non-organic dairy. If I could ban one thing in the whole world, it would be wheat. It's like it just absolutely annihilates our body. I call it arsenic. No good can come from eating wheat. And I know like everyone goes, oh, but I really like bread. Choose a different type of bread. Go for rye bread. Go for gluten-free. Just don't eat the wheat. Like it's just so bad for us and so hormone disruptive. Not all grains. There's a lot of reasons for that, but wheat now is such a processed and Franken grain. They call it a Frankenstein food, Franken grain. It's just not a food at all. And instead, we need to learn how to eat balanced. And what does that actually mean? So it's about balancing our macronutrients. And so every time we eat, making sure we call it PFC, that we're eating proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. So eating balanced plate. So that would be a protein like for breakfast, eggs or fish. And then we have fats, for example, butter, and then starchy carbs, for example, fruits, and non-starchy carbs like our leafy greens and veg. And if we can, this is how we should be taught to eat at school. If we can make up a plate every single time we eat, this is how we're going to balance our blood sugars. This is one of the ways we're going to reduce our stress hormones. This in turn is going to help balance our sex hormones, produce, help our body to make its progesterone. This is the key. This is just so the key. It's like it's almost too simple. And then for people where they are really struggling with stubborn perimenopausal weight, we also offer specific food strategies and guidance on nutrient dense foods at certain times of the day. But to begin with, we've got to get the blood sugars balanced with the PFC macronutrient balancing. Doing the correct exercise at the right time of day. So in the mornings, our cortisol spikes. And that's actually when we should be doing a sort of higher energy exercise like cycling or an aerobics class. But later in the day, this is time for swimming, or you can see these ladies doing Tai Chi or yoga. We've got to be really careful of not spiking cortisol later in the day. Sleep hygiene, this is such a big one. So if you're waking in the night, have a bedtime snack. I always recommend something like an oat cake with some nut butter, a fat and a carbohydrate just before you go to bed. Or if you're waking in the night, literally grab some raisins and nuts, something like that, a fat and a carb. And because that tricks your body. And blood sugars are all over the place in menopause. Having a bedtime snack or snacking if you're waking really, really helps. Journaling your worries because the brain, if we haven't got enough progesterone, our brain, we're trying to get into that parasympathetic response, get, excuse me, get those thoughts down onto paper, get into bed by 10. Oh, I mean, long gone are the days of going out at 10 o'clock at night because we kind of need to be in bed by 10 for our menopause symptoms. And sleep in the pitch dark, no LEDs, no bright lights, like just go for get that pineal gland really switching off. Cutting out the xenoestrogens. And so when I talked about those nasty chemicals, it's these estrogen mimicking compounds. If it says on the back of your products, parabens, phthalates, SLS, sodium lauryl sulfate, toluene, propylene glycol, and perfume, these are the big six offenders. There are lots of others, but these are the big six to avoid. So going for cleaner products where you can. And review hormone replacement. So this is a big topic, but Basically, there are two types of HRT. There's other options too, but there's two real types of HRT. There's actual hormones and there's synthetic stuff that women get put on, which really annoys me. And again, under the NIC regulations, it's even stated that the real hormones are actually, they come with less risk. Which is everything that we want, right? We want the benefit, but without the side effects. So it's highlighted. I've actually got on my website, I've actually got the current NIC guidelines, and it states, you can see it clear as day, that despite the fact that the more natural, the body identical hormones come with the less risk, that women should be given synthetics first. Please educate yourself and please fight back. Ask for something different. Again, letter on my website or your GP, which states what you want to look at. Go do the research yourself. So basically, if you have got something called levonorgestrel, or there's another, a norethistone, I think it's called, these are synthetic progesterones, and we call them progestins to differentiate the difference, distinguish the difference. What is happening to my brain today? Menopause. And these progestins are found in the Mirena coil or any of the hormonal coils, the combination patch, the combination pill, and the progesterone only pill, the standard versions of those. I'm going to talk about versions that it's not in a moment. And what you can see from these diagrams is it doesn't even look like progesterone. It looks more like testosterone. And this is important because do you remember way back at the beginning of this talk, I mentioned that testosterone is a ramp you up hormone, progesterone's calming. So what the problem is when we take these progestins, it doesn't even act like progesterone. It's not going to calm us down. In fact, it acts as a stressor and it makes our body stop producing progesterone. And progesterone is what we need because it's anti-inflammatory and it's calming. This testosterone mimicking thing actually is a huge problem, and most women feel so much better when they stop taking the progestins. And a lot of women were put on these things because they had things like heavy bleeds, but those heavy bleeds were a sign of lack of progesterone. So it's about finding the right dose of the natural or the body identical progesterones. And so the body identical would be something like the Eutrogestin. In the UK, it's also called Geprentix, and there's a combination with estrogen called Bijuv, and Cyclogest. And so they're not natural. They are made in a lab, but they're made from yams and they are body identical hormones. And that's what we are looking for, something that actually our body knows what to work with. A lot of women can be very nervous about arguing back to their doctor, but again, I would definitely be saying seek some support, so that you know and go in knowing what you're asking for, because it is your right to have the treatment that you want if it's medically viable for you. So yeah, I would definitely be pushing back if you're on the synthetics and feel awful. That's the thing. If you feel awful, if you don't feel awful, fine. The other thing I would say is if you've had a hysterectomy, depending on the reason for your hysterectomy, you might have been told, so if it was non-hormone cancer, you would have been told if you haven't got a womb, you can't have progesterone. That's just, it's not factually true. And it depends on your doctor. So I would be looking for a second opinion because a lot of women just really feel so awful without the progesterone. If you have had a hormone cancer, then hormones of any type are obviously not a good idea. So that's all of the stuff that I have to talk to you about. But what are the next steps? Well, if you're interested in everything that I've talked about, mine and Laura's book, Improving the Menopause Experience Through Nutrition and Lifestyle, is available to order from Amazon, Waterstones, and WH Smith. And it goes into everything that I've talked about, plus a lot more, including really diving into those food strategies and diet plans, and also supplements and everything else that you could possibly need to know. If you want to find out more about the book, then go to improvingmenopause.co.uk. If you're interested in working with our team of coaches, our coaches are phenomenal, and you also get to work with me. The online hormone clinic offering, we do food intolerance testing. We offer you the right food strategy dependent on where you are in your health journey. You get supplement recommendations. We can also signpost to low dose bioidentical hormones. We have an HRT clinic with independent nurses who completely understand about body identical hormones. So they will, if you're medically okay to be prescribed those, depending on your health history, you can, rather than go battle your GP, you can go down this route. We also do functional testing using the Dutch testing. We do gut testing and SIBO breath testing. We also have a free symptom assessor, so just go, and loads of resources, loads of free stuff. So go to hormone-wellness.co.uk and check us out. If you're interested in learning more about this, then we have loads of wellness and menopause talks and training at functionalwellness.co.uk, or if you would actually quite like some in-person training, you can go to functionalkinesiology.co.uk. And if you visit our websites, you can find out more information. And again, lots of free stuff and links to our socials. And finally, please follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm Claire Snowdon-Darling on TikTok, and Claire Snowdon-Darling Official on Facebook and Instagram. And I talk a lot about progesterone and yeah, a lot of bits and pieces. So please check me out and follow me. And that is all that I've got to tell you today. And it's been an absolute delight. And if you have any further questions, then please get in touch on socials. And if you're interested in anything else I've talked about, then you can also contact us at info@hormone-wellness.co.uk. And that's bye for now.